Hey everybody, if you guys have been following my channel for a while now, you know a little bit about my background and having gotten a master's in teaching in America and going through the school system and getting my education over there, and then coming to Sweden and teaching in Swedish schools for my first year and a half in Sweden. So I've gotten to see the differences firsthand between schools in America and Sweden, and I've made 2 videos on my channel describing these differences in detail already on my channel. This past year in Sweden, I have been working for a startup that works with soccer, or football as we say, in pretty much every country in Europe. And we went on a business trip this winter. So actually the people that I work with, my colleagues and my bosses, they were in Portland, where I grew up. And since the school where I went and where my parents teach, they're gonna use our software for their soccer program at the school, I took it as an opportunity to show my colleagues and my bosses the school where I grew up, the school where I played soccer, and give them a little tour of the facilities. And this was very, very interesting because always on this channel, I'm talking about my perspectives experienced in Sweden, and this was like a little bit of a reversal, taking the Swedes and getting their reactions to the high school where I actually went as a student. So in this video, I'm gonna go over a few things that they noticed that I think really stood out to the Swedes. Now, their first impression walking into the school was wow. It was like they were walking into a movie set. They had never been to an American high school before. And most Swedish people, what they see of American schools is always in TV and films, like High School Musical. Somebody made a comment like, wow, this feels like High School Musical. The school just felt so big and surreal to them. I think that American schools are typically a little bit more in terms of students and buildings and facilities and everything. Everything seems to be a little bit bigger. I've taken a little bit of a poll amongst my friends. How big were the schools that you went to? And the schools that I taught at in Sweden were middle schools. Around, one was like a little over 100 kids and one was 500 kids. And then asking about high schools and where people went, 1,000 kids would be maybe not uncommon here in Sweden, but the school where I went to was maybe an average sized high school in the town where I grew up in. And we had like 1,700 students, and it's not uncommon to have high schools with over 2,000 students in the area where I grew up. So when you come into this, it has a much bigger feeling. But I think what magnifies this feeling of the school being big even more is that sports is a huge part of school life in America. So not only do you have all the classrooms and these things, but they've got gyms for basketball, they've got fields for soccer and American football, they've got a gymnastics room, weight rooms, all these facilities that makes the school seem so much bigger. Whereas sports in Sweden, they're not usually closely aligned and affiliated with schools. It's usually kids will go and do club sports. So when you come to an American high school, it's like, wow, there's so many facilities. I mean, we have a theater for drama and theater productions, and a big room for band practice, and all of these school activities all in one building, and it really gives off that vibe of being a very, very large institution. Now, this is honestly one of the things that I prefer about the schools in America, and one of my favorite parts of going to school in America was the high school sports and being a part of the soccer team and representing my school, wearing my school colors at the games. You have your school name on the front, you're representing your school. The students would come out and support, and it wasn't uncommon to have 200-300 people coming to watch the games and support you while you're representing your school. And that's for soccer. I mean, if you go to basketball or American football games, there'd be even more people coming out to support the school, and it feels really good, and there's just a sense of community with everybody rallying around the school sports, and it was something that I always looked forward to, with my parents being high school soccer coaches and growing up with that. It was always my dream to grow up and represent and play for that school. And that's a sort of situation where it's not quite as common in Sweden, where people don't grow up with that allegiance of I want to represent the school, I want to represent my town or whatever. And in some states, in some parts of America, it is even bigger, like high school football, for example, in Texas. It's not uncommon to get 10 or 20,000 people. The entire town will come out and support the local high school football team. There's just nothing like that in Sweden. Now, along these same lines, one thing that really stood out to the Swedes that we're visiting was how much American schools embrace individual success. And I had never considered this before, but now that I think about it, they were totally right, because when we're walking down the hallway, you've got the math student of the month and their picture with a little description of what they did, and the science student of the month. And then you walk down the athletic hallway and it's got all of the players that made it onto the all-state teams throughout the years going back. You walk into the gym and it's got every sport team and the years that they won the league titles or state titles and all of these things. Everywhere you go in the school, they were celebrating individual and team accomplishments. And then I went up and showed them the weight room. My parents are PE teachers, and every statistical data from every student is logged on whiteboards. And this was crazy to them, because you could go and see like, oh, Perez or Buchholz or, you know, all these people. They could just look down the list and see exactly what they were lifting, what their max lifts were. And everybody was always competing with each other. And there's such a more competitive environment in America, and I think this goes so much into the bigger cultural norms, with maybe you can even look into it like capitalism and everybody trying to, you know, fight and win, and this mentality of always trying to be the best, and everything's measured. And Americans, they love statistics and competing and all of these individual accomplishments. They like to celebrate it. When somebody does something well, they post it on, you know, the walls, or this student just got a scholarship to go to this college and this and this and this, and it's everywhere at the schools. It's posted everywhere. And they said you never see individual accomplishments at the Swedish schools. And I thought about it, and they were right. I mean, it's much, much, much less common in Sweden that you really celebrate the individual. And that just goes to show so much about American culture, that this is just something that is bred into the system, and it's part of the DNA and the fabric of who Americans are standing out and celebrating that individuality. Where in Sweden, it's much more of a community mindset, and everybody working together in this vibe of having, you know, jantelagen and not wanting to stick out, and it's just completely different. And this is something that they noticed right away. And had I not had Swedish people with me, I would have just been like, oh yeah, this is normal. This is just what happens at the American schools. You see all the records and the students and the accomplishments. This was really, really interesting to them, and it gave me a whole new perspective on my own culture as an American. Now, to go along with this community mindset that they have in Sweden, I noticed something very interesting in Swedish schools. Now, in the schools where I taught at, it was a cohort system. So you had groups of students that would take all of their classes together, and different teachers would come to that classroom. And so you have all the same kids in all of your classes. Now, in this system, everybody kind of gets along with everybody. There's not like separate cliques and groups. Of course, you have students that are friends with other students that are similar, and they'll hang out together, but it doesn't seem quite as separated as it is maybe in America. It's kind of like what people see over here in the movies. You've got your groups of like the nerds that'll be playing like Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the corner. You've got your jocks that are, you know, they're not really worried about the academics as much. They're just more worried about the sports. And you've got the theater people over here and the math people over here. And it's just very, very interesting. And I wonder, because people are not afraid to stand out and celebrate those individual differences, that people are more likely to find those people that are similar to them and kind of cling together a little bit more closely and push away the people that are maybe a little bit different. I mean, it's not always like this, but I think because people stand out a lot more, they're more likely to form those little cliques. And I think in the broader spectrum, I think this type of system might lead to a country where you've got such strong differences in a lot of areas, whether it's politically, socioeconomically, and I just think of, this could be a topic for a completely separate video, but I think about like politically and the spectrum of what Republicans believe and Democrats believe. It is very, very strong differences. And even though there are a lot of differences in Sweden too, I just feel like the community mindset is just a little bit more, everybody just seems to be just a little bit more connected. The last thing I want to touch on in this video is at one point during the tour, the bell went off. And when the bell goes off, the hallways go from completely empty to boom, every student, the whole school is changing classes at the same time. Now, like I said, in Sweden, people usually will stay with their one group of students, or schedules will be completely different. Everybody's just kind of changing classes at different times, whereas in America, it's so structured. It's like from 8 to 9, everybody is at period 1, and then the bell will go off, and then everybody changes and goes to a different class around the campus, and then boom, you've got period 2. And everything is so structured like this. Every school is different. Of course, some Swedish schools might do it more similar to America, but in what I've experienced and what my colleagues had experienced, this was kind of interesting for them to see that, like, nobody's in the hallways, and then boom, bell goes off, everybody's changing at the same time. Kind of interesting. So with that, guys, those were just a few things that my colleagues thought were interesting at the school where I grew up at. I wonder if you guys think these things are interesting too. I know there's a lot of viewers on my channel that have spent time in both America and Sweden, maybe people that have done, you know, study abroad or exchange years and those types of things. So maybe you've seen these types of things firsthand. If that's you, write about your experiences down in the comments section. And if any of these things surprise you, I'd love to hear about it. But with that, I'm going to wrap this video up, and I will see you guys in the next one.